Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gym Break Cast, where we sit down and we just go through all those visionary and integrator type ideas that come to us as we do our normal daily gym break. Now, we've talked a lot about agencies, marketing director, and us being kind of a marketing and branding agency ourselves, and just working with a plethora of boutique studios, gyms of all different sizes, all the way up to, the corporate franchises within the top level of the organization. We have seen lots of different trends, lots of different ways that studios can market. And one thing that I get and I see in every industry is niching. Someone else the other day called it niching. I didn't know you could call it two different things, but you have niching, whatever you like to call it. And it's become sort of a fad over the last, I'll say, 10, 15 years, not just in the studio space, but in lots of different industries. I have kind of a sour patch to this, funny enough, because I feel like niching, I'm just going to call it niching. I like to call it niching. So I'm going to call it niching for the remainder of this podcast moving forward. I just like the word niche better, because you're finding your niche spot within a certain market. I actually think that this can really expand and grow and make your studio run lean, or it could actually set you up for complete failure. And so we're going to kind of go through both those directions. When is the right time to niche? When is the wrong time to niche? When you may be thinking about niching, or maybe you need to de-niche. I had someone the other day say, I've never heard of anyone de-niching before, which we're kind of doing within our agency as a marketing agency right now. Completely different model. It kind of has the same premise. Overall, every business is very similar. The only real difference is, hey, do you have a local market? Do you have an online market? Do you have a global market? Are you B2C? Are you B2B? Business to business? Do you work with other business owners? Do you work with just consumers? Is what the C stands for, B2C, if you don't know that. Within the studio space, you're usually really focusing on a B2C market. You're focusing on consumers. Now, can consumers be considered at what I like to call B2B market? Yes, they could. If you're, a supplier to the gym space, for instance, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get really into the boutique studio. Now, you have different types of studio models you can go off of. One of the big ones that have come up through the last 15 to 20 years, and you can see it with like Orange Theory is a great example of this. Soul Cycle is another good example of this, where you kind of take what we call a micro studio or a micro gym, and you pick one service, you focus on one audience. Yoga studios can also kind of be considered, a micro studio, and or what we consider a niche type of studio. You can get even further niched. Let's kind of go into my story a little bit. I'm going to go into my story. I'm going to kind of talk about the positives and negatives that I've seen through examples from prospects, what I've personally encountered myself. And then we'll continue to talk about when you should niche, if you should do it later, if you should do it earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's start off by talking about my example. I'm in marketing field, completely different industry, completely different audience. Most of my audience is business to business. I work with gym owners per se. We have Gym Mark that we recently just launched about, 6 months ago, and it's in the early validation phases. And you can kind of take an example of why we kind of are doing what we're doing and lead into you as a studio, and when is the best time to niche, when is the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Creative is our bigger agency. When we first opened Creative, we basically became a full service marketing agency. We just adapted to that direction because we wanted to test certain things out. We wanted to get our services down that we felt were necessarily. And at the time, we were just grasping at trying to bring in clients so we could test, build a repository of cash that we can use once we got validated with certain types of services and offerings. It's very similar to the gym space. The time and when you do it could be completely different. Me, for instance, we're kind of I'm not going to say global, we're more of this, we work with more people in the States, but we also work globally. So our market expands different time zones, different situations. And so we have a broader market. We also have less so gym owners than we do. Let's say we have less so gym owners than we do, fitness enthusiasts. If fitness enthusiasts, of course, are probably certain types of fitness enthusiasts, which is a much deeper conversation and audience. But, that is probably more so your audience. We'll say within a global perspective, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we'll just say there's 20,000, maybe even 30,000 gym brands out there, fitness brands. We'll just say fitness brands in general. And then you tailor it down to brick and mortar versus online to also different types of audiences. I'm getting off subject here, so I'm going to try to lane myself back in, but you take the gist of it, right? So we started broad because there's so many different services that we wanted to test. And me, myself, just wanted to bring income, and I just enjoyed growing a business. There became a part in the history of what we were developing when I evolved as a person, and I started saying to myself, okay, I love working with this type of audience more so, and these ones are the ones that we're validating that allowed us to create Gymmark and continue to push those offers. We are now in continued validation right now with that audience. Now, with that said, creative still exists. We're allowed to. I don't have a brick and mortar. At least right now, we don't need to create, we don't have people coming in on the daily basis to use our services. We can do a lot of our services online or through workshops or through travel, right? So we don't necessarily have to be in one central location. Now you can see me getting down to my point here. From a studio perspective, you're local. So your expansion is a little bit different than mine. For creative, we separated. We said, hey, we're going to take these types of services, these offerings that we see work really well. We've had gyms internally working with us that we were able to say, all right, between gyms of different sizes, through all the different sizes of studios that we've worked with, like I said earlier, that we can say, hey, this is the common practices and things we need. Now, once they get bigger, more customization needs to get in. So creative is kind of, in short, staying as a customizable type agency meant for larger studio brands. We'll just say, because I told you I knew the niche, we'll say between 3 to 7 locations that have higher gross margin because they have multiple populations. Now, Gymmark, on the other hand, we're validating towards smaller studio owners that need certain services that may not necessarily need to be customized. Now, why do I say this? Well, it's very similar to a studio, just with a little bit of tweaks. Do you need to niche early, or do you want to specialize later? You're going to have different perspectives that are going to allow this to make this decision. One, if you already have experience within the studio space and you're looking to say right off the bat, I want to franchise this brand, or you have one studio that you're like, okay, we've gone through validation, in which we'll get to the second part here. You kind of need to start from scratch. And so you have the opportunity now to create a whole new brand and create a micro gym, for instance. SoulCycle and Orange Theory are a great example. And I like to use them because everyone knows them, right? So you can kind of come in and you can say, hey, we have a model here that we know that we can expand pretty fast through operations, through branding practices, through marketing practices, because we've tested it and we proved it. So that is the benefit of niching very early. Now, that doesn't happen for most of us. Most of us don't come in as an investor, and that's another point. If you're getting an investment to launch, of course, you have a business plan, you have all the operations, you have all that stuff down, you build it all out first, but you have data to kind of showcase, like, this is the path we're going to go, and the projections are pretty easy to understand. So with that said, that's when you should niche early. But like I said, most of us don't have that ability. Most of us don't have that capital to say, hey, I know now if I'm going to throw $100,000 on this year one, that we're going to be able to make $1 million, 10x it, right? So a lot of it's learning as you go and understanding, hence why you have programs that help you understand how to do business practices. You have consultants that help you understand and systematize and all that stuff. So what are the benefits of specializing later? Well, this is kind of what happens to most of us, right? Within the studio space, you know what's going to work and what's not. You've gone through those trials and tribulations. You've validated certain types of audiences. So the advantages of going broader, of course, is you get to test the market, right? You get to kind of say, hey, we're going to be in validation phase. We're going to hit different social media ads. We're going to just bring people in. And this is actually funny enough where a lot of studio owners get stuck in validation phase space is because they have this plethora in their head of saying, okay, like we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. They don't understand that the reason it's an advantage to be broader though first is because you can learn that validation. You can say, all right, we brought in 300 members in. We have one location. We know it works in this type of city. And we'll say this type of city as in, is it like a urban area? Is it a large city? Is the demo of the people of higher income, of lower income? Are we focusing on, have we started to see traction with students? Have we started to see traction with females, males, of certain age ranges, stuff like that? Like you start seeing that stuff, you start collecting more data, but you actually start using that data to say, all right, now it's time to take it to the next phase. Like I said, for most studios that are boutique, that's usually, you know, between the 250 and 500K mark. And I keep that pretty broad based off of your price range, and how many members it takes you to kind of make it to that next phase. Now, where I see most really getting into the specialization and starting to understand that, hey, we want to make this the next level, we think we have something here, is between 500 and a million. So when is that sign to start knowing when you're niching down? We've talked about the advantages of niching early. We've talked about the advantages of niching later on in the business's development. Now, when is that sign? Kind of brought this up earlier. You start seeing trends in your industry. So you start understanding your audience more. Let's say you have an audience of, you know, let's just say you have 300 members. You're cycling. You're at that point where you're kind of continuing to cycle 300 members. In my industry, for instance, we started to see trends in, you know, the bigger projects, in the retention of clients. How many prospects are we getting into the door versus how many we're selling? And then there'd be a trend on, funny enough, get into this circle of so many people leaving by a certain time and then people coming in, and it kind of just stuck at the same number over and over again. It was signs that, hey, we aren't either niche enough or we're too neat, we're trying to niche too early. So we kind of decided to, that's why we decided to branch off to the niche one and then niche another, but still have similar team members on board, right? That we can offer some of our services at a lower price. But for you, for instance, it would probably be more so, you know, you're in a local area, you're starting to see a trend of, let's just, since, you know, this is in Arizona, let's just say, you know, a Phoenix area, you're seeing that you're in the urban area of Phoenix. And let's say you have a demo of, you know, normal income of 50K, you know, now you can say, all right, seems like most of our demo is, you know, in here is males and females. Maybe you have a, you know, a little bit broader. You're seeing a mix between the two at, you know, a certain size. And you're seeing most of them go into certain types of classes. Let's just say yoga classes, for instance, certain types of yoga classes. Maybe you see a certain specific need or gap in the market. You know, we're talking to a prospect right now that's very niche into just high school and college athletes, and they focus much more on performance. Like that is their jam. Do they have weight equipment? Yes, but they also have to have like a track and field type atmosphere so that they can do more endurance type stuff as well. So they're a little bit more of an athletic club at that point, right? Because they focus on performance and sports. So they're niching down to that. We know for a fact that they're now not going to focus on, you know, yoga, for instance, because they're performance based. Maybe they have a yoga class here and there, but that's besides the point. They found a gap in their market in a certain area where they're like, oh, we have a lot of high schools and a lot of colleges in this area where students are getting degrees for sports. So let's just focus on that. And that's a sign you need to niche. You're seeing a certain pattern of people. Next, recognize your unique strengths and your passions. Going back to me personally and what I do for a living, you know, branding and marketing, I have a very big passion for brand development, consulting. I'm very good at the online stuff. I'm very great at operations. So that's where Gym Mart came in. We decided to make much more of a production type house so that we can focus on honing in even more our ability to do more marketing practices for studios. But then we also kept creative separate so that I could start bringing on more of my passions on the education and the teaching and the consulting, customization side for those larger studios, because that's also very much of a passion of mine. So a further sign of this is that your experience in stagnation or difficulty standing out from the competition. We talked about this earlier. We talked about your ability to be stuck at a certain number, and we talked about that a little bit. Go a little bit further back if you want to hear us talking about that. But part of that stagnation does come down to your standing out from the competition. Now, there's multiple different signs of why you're staying stagnant, and it's different for everyone. Everyone's psychologically different, but normally it comes down to you don't know what you want. You're kind of at a point where you have to start focusing on vision, and you kind of go in multiple different directions. I mean, painter doesn't paint his own house, like, except unless you're a painter. But we usually don't look at the inside of us from the outside, but we can look at everyone else from the outside, right? And so when I look at a lot of these studios, it's because they're stagnant in their own evolution. And that's okay. If you want to stick at a 300K a year gym and that's what success looks like for you, okay, great. You don't need to go through all this stuff. But usually it revolves around the mindset of shifting gears of, all right, I'm going to have to spend a lot more time and energy to evolve this gym than I like right now, and or you're ready for that. You know that you can spend 15 hours a day. I'm maybe over exaggerating a little bit, but you're be able to spend that time to really hone in on a particular way of differentiating yourself. So let's talk about a little bit. This one's kind of broad. You know, we'll go in deeper into all these later on. You know, let's talk a little bit about how you start to transition towards your niche. How do you start to really say, all right, I'm ready? Well, first off, you have to allow yourself to be ready. You have to know who you are. So what do I mean by that? One of the main reasons you probably opened the studio to begin with is because you're at a point where you are passionate about it. You probably were a personal trainer. You could have been an investor or a marketer. I mean, I'm looking to open the vision of what I have for Gym Market goes way above just having a branding and marketing agency. You know, we can talk about that later too if we go on to vision as one of our topics. But you need to kind of look at yourself. What do you value? What are the types of people you want to bring in? And you need to start realizing that communication amongst all aspects is going to be, and really it's that simple. When if you're feeling very intimidated by the sense of how you niche, remember your business and your brand, what you're trying to evolve your studio into is going to really 100% focus on you realizing it's like, hey, it's how do I communicate this to myself and how do I communicate it with other people? And let's look at all the different forms of communication. You have visual communication, which is really branding. You have marketing, always communication. Your operations, the people you bring in, the documents that you create, all different forms of communication. So just think about it in that terms. Like you have to start communicating changes for your audience and your team. So a good way to put that is this is the time that when branding really comes into play. Your branding efforts. What's your story? How are you displaying that story? How is it different than the other studio down the street? How are you displaying that visually? I use a great example here. You know, I did a speech. I helped a group of business owners create their own lemonade stand. It's kind of a way to showcase what is branding and how they could display that difference. I use a lemonade stand as a good example. Funny enough, I tied it into studio. So it's actually kind of a cool presentation. But I talked about if you had a lemonade stand and that lemonade stand was in bright reds and just blacks, for instance, and this is just visual communications, not anything else, I'm just talking about visual, it would be probably not really bringing in those types of audience that you may want based off of your price point, blah, 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 blah. That's just a small example, but you know, that goes across everything. That goes across the way you're verbally. If you're saying, let's get our throb on, yeah, that's probably a weird thing to say actually, but let's get our pump on. That's a good one. Let's get our pump on. That may not be directly correlated to like if you're you're trying to niche towards more mindset and meditation, right? So your messaging, and this could go down to your offers as well. So in short, all of your branding, all of your should be systematized. You can systematize that too. Yes, you can. You can have all your branding stuff systematized, all your messaging systematized. You start displaying changes in your pricing and your offer offers to relate to that new messaging because you've started to see that correlation. And then your programs, and this goes back to your offer, your program. If you're niching down, and we'll just use SoulCycle as a good example, or Orange Theory, it doesn't really matter. You can kind of see that they focus very heavily on their offers, really tailoring around endurance in running, SoulCycle, biking. So your visuals should match all that. And you could even go into much deeper type mythology as well. And you talk a lot about if you eventually start to bring on products, how do those relate? How do you take things from other industries, which we can talk about later as well, to utilize? But then this is going to start building you that community. Now, another way you can start transitioning that is you start building partnerships within your niche. Now you know the types of trade shows or organizations you can focus on, the types of consultants you can bring in, the types of people that can work with you because they're understanding the industry as well. So you start building partnerships. Let's say you are a yoga studio and you focus, and I've said this before, and you, unless you're just one local area, you start niching down. And remember, this is just the start of niching. So this is the start of systematizing. Maybe you realize that you do prenatal yoga classes. Maybe that's your niche in general, prenatal, which means your retention's probably only going to be about 9 months, but that could be one class. You could focus on partnering with, let's say, local daycares that have kids, schools, because now you have the opportunity to have a program set up where maybe you offer free daycare or you do a cross promotion. Two different, very similar audiences, but they're different verticals. So you're not stealing competition and you're not working. And a lot of people do this, you know, they'll do it through like restaurants. Restaurants is a simple one. Health smoothie places, like really healthy type cuisine. I think that's very simple partnership mythology because restaurants too have a much larger demo than what you're looking for. But you can start looking at those types of niches, and this can come down to your marketing as well. Who do you market to? So that's really just, you know, how you can start to understand and the signs of when you're ready to niche down. And this was a lot. This was a little bit longer than our normal cast. Apparently, I'm very, not going to say knowledgeable, but I'm very much have a passion for niching. Really what it comes down to is I think the key takeaways from this cast, if you're listening to this, is you need to know that if you're very early on and you didn't start off by systematizing and niching, and you're a little earlier on, don't push yourself to niche too fast or niche too fast because you're going to set yourself up for failure if you niche before you understand your audience too much, or you don't have an audience, or you don't have a group of people you're passionate about. So I would really wait till a certain point, back to what I've seen, probably not going to give you a number, but I'd probably say between 700K a year and $1 million before you even think about niching down. If your overall business perspective is, hey, I want to expand this and I want to grow, that's the perfect time to niche. But just be wary, you're going to be spending a lot of money on operations, branding, possibly coming up with partners that can help you. Maybe on our next one, I'll go a little bit deeper on ways you can niche. Let's do that. We'll talk more about niching. We'll probably have plenty of casts where we talk about niching. But I think that's going to be it for today. Yeah, let's let that be it for today, so everyone can turn this cast off. But again, my name is Zach Coleman, and I really appreciate you coming in and listening to another episode of the Gym Break Cast. Hopefully you had a good gym break, and I hope you all get back to it.